The Galactic Senate had a room for emergencies. It was deep underground, 12 levels below the main chamber, carved into the bedrock of Centaura Prime, sealed with doors thick enough to stop a railgun round at close range. The walls were lined with screens. The screens were never dark. Somewhere in the galaxy, something was always going wrong. But the room had not been used for a full emergency session in 41 years. It was being used now. Grand Senator Vorath of the Kelthari stood at the center of the floor and looked at the data for the fourth time. He was a large being, wide shoulders, gray-green skin, eyes that had seen 3 wars and 2 collapses of member state governments. He did not rattle easily. He was rattled. "Run it again," he said. The aide behind him, a young Tassani female named Relic who had never once questioned an order in her 2 years of service, hesitated. "Grand Senator, we have already run verification 7 times. The data is run it again." She ran it again. The screens filled with battle telemetry, sensor logs, heat signatures, mass readings. The footage from the 3 surviving scout drones that had been on the edge of the Kareth system when it happened. Vorath watched. He had watched it 4 times already. He watched it again now because some part of his brain, the part that had survived 40 years of galactic politics by refusing to accept things that could not be explained, kept insisting that there was a mistake somewhere. A corrupted file, a misread sensor, a drone malfunction. There was no mistake. The footage showed the Kareth system. A quiet system, 3 dead planets, 1 asteroid belt, no habitable worlds. It had been chosen for its emptiness, no civilian traffic, no witnesses. A clean place to do what needed to be done. What needed to be done was the destruction of a single vessel. The vessel had been flagged 8 months ago. A ship of unknown configuration, moving through the outer edge of Kelthari space without a registry number, without a transponder signal, without any identification at all. When hailed, it had responded in a language that took 3 weeks to translate. When told to stand down for boarding and inspection, it had refused. Not aggressively, not with weapons. It had simply said in the translated language, "We are going home. We do not stop for inspections." That was it. The Empire had protocols for unregistered vessels. The protocols were clear. You hailed, you waited, you boarded. If the vessel refused, you escorted it to the nearest processing station under armed guard. If it resisted escort, you destroyed it. The vessel had resisted escort. It had damaged 2 of the escort frigates. Not severely, not lethally, but enough that both ships had to break off pursuit. That alone was remarkable. Kelthari frigates were not fragile. The weapons on an unregistered vessel of that size should not have been capable of punching through standard military shielding. But they had. After that, the situation had escalated up the chain of command until it reached the office of Fleet Admiral Sen. Sen was not a patient being. He was also deeply conscious of what it meant, politically, symbolically, for a random unregistered ship to damage Imperial military vessels and then just leave, to continue on its way as if the Imperial Navy were a minor inconvenience. Sen had sent a battle group, not a patrol, not a larger escort, a battle group. 7 ships, the cruiser Undying Reach as the flagship, 2 destroyer-class vessels, the Hammerclaw and the Sunder, 3 heavy frigates, 1 dedicated electronic warfare vessel, 142 crew across all ships, all of them experienced, all of them armed with weapons that had won engagements against pirates, smugglers, and 2 breakaway member state militaries in the last decade. The mission had been rated as routine suppression. Estimated engagement duration, 12 minutes. Vorath watched the footage again. The battle group had caught the unregistered vessel at the edge of the Kareth system. The Undying Reach had transmitted a final warning in 3 languages, including the vessel's own. The warning had given the crew 30 seconds to power down weapons, cut engines, and prepare for boarding. The vessel had not powered down. It had turned. Vorath had watched this part more times than he could count now. He kept watching it for the same reason a person probes a sore tooth with their tongue. Not because it helped, but because some part of the brain refuses to let things be. The unregistered ship turned. It was smaller than the Undying Reach, significantly smaller, roughly the mass of a heavy frigate. Its configuration was strange, angular in ways that Kelthari ship design never was. Flat surfaces where there should have been curves. It did not look like a warship, not by Imperial standards. It looked, if anything, like something that had been designed by a species that had never seen another species' ships. Like something designed from scratch with no reference point. The Undying Reach fired first. Standard opening salvo. 4 primary batteries. 2 torpedo spreads the full weight of a cruiser's opening punch. The kind of strike that had crippled warships twice its size. The unregistered vessel moved. Vorath had watched it so many times that he had started to think he was seeing things. Ships did not move like that. Not at that mass. Not at that speed. The laws of physics that govern thruster output and inertia and turning radius did not allow for what the drone footage showed. The vessel moved like it had been designed by something that did not respect the Empire's understanding of physics. The salvo hit nothing. Then the unregistered vessel fired back. The Undying Reach, 230 meters of armored cruiser hull, triple-layered shielding, the most decorated ship in the Fifth Fleet, came apart in 11 seconds. Not damaged, not crippled, apart. Vorath had checked the mass readings from the drone. The debris field matched. The Undying Reach was gone. What followed was not a battle. Vorath was not sure there was a word for it in any of the 14 languages he spoke. The two destroyers moved to engage. The frigates spread out to create a crossfire. The electronic warfare vessel began attempting to jam the unregistered ship's targeting systems. A standard tactic, something that had blinded enemy vessels in a dozen engagements. The unregistered vessel appeared to ignore the jamming entirely. It moved through the battle group the way a person might walk through a room. Unhurried. Each pass, something died. The Hammerclaw lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The Sunder lasted 2. The 3 frigates went in under 3 minutes combined. The electronic warfare vessel, the slowest, the least armed, the one that had no business being in a fight, lasted the longest, almost 6 minutes, because the unregistered vessel seemed to set it aside and come back to it last. Then it was over. 7 Imperial ships. 142 crew. Gone. The unregistered vessel had taken damage. The drone sensors registered heat blooms along 2 sections of its hull that suggested significant internal damage. It had not come through clean, but it had come through. It had turned back onto its original heading. It was still going home. Vorath stopped the footage. The room was very quiet. 12 senators around the walls, all of them staring at the same screens, all of them wearing the expression of people who had just been told that something they had believed to be solid ground was, in fact, a painted floor above an empty shaft. "What is it?" said Senator Marin of the Draith. Not a question, a kind of quiet demand. "What is that ship?" "We don't know," Vorath said. "Then where is it from?" Vorath pulled up the second file, the translation team's report, the analysis of the language used in the initial hailing exchange 8 months ago. 8 months of work, because the language was genuinely alien, not related to any of the 4,700 registered languages in the Imperial database, not a dialect of anything, not a pidgin, not a trade tongue. It was something new. But the translation team had been thorough, and in their report, buried in an appendix, was a note about a single word that the unregistered vessel had used during the second hailing attempt. The one made after it damaged the 2 frigates before it fled. The crew had called their ship by name. The name had been translated 3 different ways, by 3 different analysts. All 3 translations were slightly different, but all 3 contained the same root concept. Persistent, or possibly enduring, or in the most liberal translation, the one that does not stop. That told them nothing about where it was from. Then Relic had done something clever. Instead of searching the language databases, she had searched the spatial databases. She had taken the ship's heading, its original heading before the battle group intercepted it, and the heading it resumed after, and she had plotted the line. She had extended it backward past Kelthari space, past the territories of 4 other member states, past the neutral zones and the unmapped regions and the dark patches at the edge of the empires. Survey data. She had extended it forward, past the current position following the vector. At both ends, the line eventually terminated at the same location, a star system, a system that was in the database, flagged, catalogued, assigned a number. SL227G, a single yellow star, 8 planets, 1 large moon orbiting the 3rd planet. Surveyed 230 years ago by an Imperial scout fleet. The scout fleet's report had been filed and archived. The 3rd planet had shown signs of primitive habitation, pre-spaceflight civilization, early industrialization stage, no threat assessment, no follow-up required. The file had been closed. No one had looked at it since. Vorath stared at the system designation on the screen for a long time. "Pull the original survey," he said. Relic pulled it. The survey was 230 years old. The civilization on the 3rd planet had been using combustion-based locomotion. Their most advanced flying machines were early fixed-wing atmospheric craft. They had not yet split the atom. They had no concept of faster-than-light travel. 230 years ago. "How long," Vorath said, "does it take for a civilization to go from atmospheric flight to that?" He gestured at the frozen frame on the screen, the angular ship, the debris that had been the Undying Reach. No one answered, because no one knew. The Empire had records of dozens of civilizations at various stages of development. It had records of member states who had made the leap from early spaceflight to interstellar capability. The fastest transition in recorded Imperial history had been the Veth, who had done it in 400 years. If this civilization had done it in 230, "We need more information," Senator Marin said. "Yes," Vorath agreed. "We need to know if that was a military vessel. We need to know if they have more." We need to know why it was in our space. We need to know. We need to know everything, Vorath said, and we know almost nothing. He looked at the debris field one more time. 142 crew, 7 ships, 11 seconds for the flagship. Send a diplomatic mission, he said. Not military, not armed. A diplomatic vessel, long-range survey equipment, translation specialists. He paused. And tell them to be careful. Senator Marin looked at him. Careful of what? We don't even know what they are yet. Vorath looked at the screen. That's exactly why. 3 weeks later, in a system on the far side of the outer rim, a battered angular ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel inside a debris field that used to be a refueling station. The ship's hull was scorched in 2 sections. Internal pressure in one compartment had dropped to 0. The crew had sealed it and moved on. The captain stood on the bridge. He was a human, 43 years old, gray at the temples, a scar along his left jaw that he had gotten in an action that the official record described in 12 words, and the actual crew described in 4 sentences that always started with "you wouldn't believe it." His name was Commander Elias Voss. He looked at what was left of the refueling station and felt the familiar hollow weight of a mission that had gone sideways 6 ways before it. Started status, he said. We're alive, said his first officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kwan. She said it the way she said everything, flat, factual, the kind of voice that had come to terms with the difference between what was ideal and what was real. Hull integrity at 61%. Drive core is functional. Weapons are functional. We are out of about 40% of our secondary consumables. That's a lot of things we're out of. Yes, sir. Can we make it home? Kwan ran the numbers. She always ran the numbers. Voss had once said that if the ship were on fire and falling apart at the seams, Kwan would still be running the numbers, and she had said, especially then, sir. Yes, she said, if we don't stop. Voss looked at the destroyed refueling station again. He did not ask who had done it. He already knew. He had been in the outer rim long enough to recognize the work. Someone had wanted to send a message. Someone had not wanted this particular route to be usable. He had not known that when Mission Command sent them out. He had a feeling Mission Command had not known it either. Or if they had considered it an acceptable variable. Voss had a complicated relationship with acceptable variables. Set course for home, he said. Already plotted, Kwan said. The ship moved. It moved the way it always moved. Not gracefully, not beautifully, but with a kind of stubborn insistence that Voss had come to think of as the ship's core personality. The Persistent was not a young vessel. It was not a showpiece. It was a working warship that had been in 3 conflicts, survived things it had no engineering reason to survive, and come home every single time. Voss had been its commander for 6 years. He was going to bring it home again. He did not know, as he stood on the bridge watching the outer rim fall away behind them, that somewhere in a sealed room on Centauri Prime, 12 senators were staring at footage of what his ship had done. He did not know that an empire he had never heard of was afraid of him. He did not know that everything was about to change. He knew one thing. He was going home. The diplomatic vessel Careful Word was the most sophisticated ship the Empire had ever built for a first contact mission. It carried 47 specialists, linguists, xenobiologists, cultural analysts, behavioral scientists, 2 medical officers, and a full team of communications engineers. The crew complement beyond the specialists was small. 20 sailors, a captain, and a first officer who had been chosen specifically because she was known for staying calm in rooms where everyone else was losing their composure. The Careful Word was also, technically speaking, unarmed. It had defensive systems, point defense arrays, ablative shielding layers that could absorb a moderate weapon strike without catastrophic hull failure. But it carried no offensive weapons, because Grand Senator Vorath had been very clear. This mission was to observe and make contact, not to fight. The last time the Empire had sent armed ships toward that particular corner of the galaxy, 142 people had not come back. Vorath was not going to repeat that. The mission commander was Ambassador Taya Schral. She was Kelthari like Vorath, but younger, 52 standard years, which was relatively young for a diplomat of her rank. She had handled 3 first contact situations in her career. All 3 had been with civilizations that were either at or below the Empire's technological level. She had never walked into a room where the other party had already destroyed a battle group. She was thinking about that as the Careful Word dropped out of FTL travel and the navigation officer announced their arrival at the edge of the SOL-22 7G system. Full passive scan, she said. Nothing active, nothing that could be read as a targeting attempt. Understood, Ambassador. The passive sensors began painting a picture. It took a few minutes. Passive scans were slower than active ones, but they were invisible, and invisibility mattered right now. Schral wanted to know what they were dealing with before she announced herself. What the passive sensors showed her made the room very quiet. The 3rd planet was what the survey had noted. Blue-green, large oceans, a single significant moon. From a distance, unremarkable. Thousands of planets in the Empire looked similar, but the system was not empty. There were structures. The passive scan picked up metallic signatures in orbit around the third planet. A lot of them. The AI began sorting and categorizing, and Shral watched the count climb. 40, 80, 120. Eventually, it stopped at 217 distinct orbital objects, large enough to register as structures rather than debris. 217. The Empire's home system had 43 orbital installations. Centauri Prime was the most heavily developed world in the known galaxy. Are those, her navigation officer started, habitats? The xenobiologist confirmed from across the bridge. Some of them. The mass readings suggest several are purely functional. Docking facilities. Manufacturing platforms. Some have atmospheric signatures consistent with inhabited pressurized environments. What's the population of the third planet? Shral asked. The AI cross-referenced the survey data against standard demographic growth models and produced an estimate. Shral read the number twice, 8 billion. The estimate, accounting for 230 years of growth from the primitive civilization the scout had noted, gave an estimate of 8 billion beings on the third planet alone. The orbital habitats were harder to estimate, but the AI gave a conservative number of somewhere between 50 and 100 million additional. The Empire's entire population was 700 billion spread across 300 worlds. This single planet had 8 billion people. Shral was a diplomat. She was trained not to show the things she was thinking on her face. She was very glad of that training right now. Keep scanning, she said. I want traffic analysis. How many ships are moving in this system? The answer came back in pieces as the passive sensors accumulated data. A lot of ships were moving, not military ships. Most of them were clearly civilian traffic, small vessels moving between the planet and the orbital structures, larger cargo ships making runs between the planet and what appeared to be mining operations in the asteroid belt. The traffic was dense. It was constant. It was the traffic of a system that had been industrialized for a long time and had never stopped. But there were military ships too. Shral counted them carefully. 11 ships that the AI flagged as likely military based on hull configuration, mass readings, and the kind of movement patterns that were different from the civilian traffic. They moved with purpose. They patrolled. Several of them were significantly larger than the careful word. One of them was very large. The AI took 3 minutes to assemble enough passive data to give her a mass estimate on the largest vessel. When it did, Shral looked at the number for a long moment and then asked the AI to verify it. The AI verified it. The largest ship in the system massed 4 times what the Empire's largest dreadnought massed. That can't be right, said her first officer. Lieutenant Commander Holt. He was Tisani, young, usually steady. He did not sound steady right now. The AI doesn't make errors on mass readings, the xenobiologist said. Then that ship is very large, Shral said crisply. Keep that observation in mind and set it aside for now. I need us focused. She stood up from her chair and straightened her diplomatic sash, a physical habit. Something she did when she needed to settle herself. We are going to transmit a contact signal. Standard first contact protocol. Our identity, our purpose, an expression of peaceful intent. We will transmit in the language used by the vessel we encountered. We will wait. And if they respond with weapons rather than words? Holt asked. Shral looked at him steadily. Then we will have learned something important about them in a very short period of time. She paused. Begin transmission. The careful word sent its signal. On Earth, in a building in Geneva that had no name on its exterior door, a communications officer named Petty Officer Danny Reeves was on the tail end of a 12-hour shift when the alert came in. She almost missed it. She had been watching the passive deep space feeds for 6 hours. It was not an exciting job. The feeds were mostly noise. Occasionally, a distant stellar event would register. Once, memorably, a chunk of rogue comet had drifted into detection range and sent 3 analysts scrambling before the AI correctly identified it as ice and rock. The alert was different. It was a signal structured, repeating, not a natural phenomenon. Reeves sat up. Her hands moved to the analysis console. She ran the signal through the standard filters and then, because the filters were not making sense of it, ran it through the advanced xenolinguistic processor that the department kept for occasions exactly like this one. The processor took 40 seconds. Then it produced a translation. Not a perfect translation, a rough one. The kind you get when a language has been partially decoded and the rest filled in with best guesses. But rough was enough. We come in peace. We are the Kelthari diplomatic mission aboard the vessel Careful Word. We seek contact with the civilization of this system. We mean no harm. We ask only to speak. Reeves stared at the translation, then she hit the alarm. Within 6 minutes, the room went from 2 people to 30. Within 12 minutes, the deputy director of the First Contact Office was on a secure line to Geneva Command. Within 20 minutes, a general was being woken up somewhere in a building in Brussels. Within 3 hours, every major government on Earth knew. Within 6 hours, the argument had started about who would respond, what they would say, and whether the response should be military or civilian. It was, one exhausted diplomat noted in a private message to a colleague, very much a very human response to an extraordinary situation. The reply came 47 hours after the careful word's initial transmission. Shrell had spent those 47 hours in a state of contained tension that she was extremely careful not to let her crew see. She had slept 4 hours. She had eaten what the nutrition staff brought her without tasting any of it. She had read the AI's continuous scan reports with the focus of a person who was trying to understand something that kept growing more complicated every time they looked at it. The reply came in the same language the careful word had used, the language of the vessel they had intercepted, which the Empire's translators had partially decoded. But it was more grammatically precise than the Empire's version, as if the people who sent it had the full language and the Empire had been working from fragments. Because they had. It was their language. The translated reply said, "We received your message. We have questions. Our first question is this: why did your warships attack one of ours?" Shrell read it twice. The phrasing was what struck her. Not your ships attacked us, not an emotional accusation, a question, calm, direct, asking for a reason. Either these people were extraordinarily disciplined, or the attack on the unregistered vessel had been a provocation they were not particularly surprised by, or they were simply very good at keeping emotion out of the first sentence. She drafted her response carefully. It took 4 hours and 6 revisions. She explained what the Empire was, what its protocols were, why the unregistered vessel had been approached, why the battle group had been sent. She was honest about the escalation. She did not minimize it. She did not apologize directly, not in the first message, because she had learned that premature apologies in first contact situations often read as weakness to cultures that had not yet established whether the diplomat represented something worth respecting. But she acknowledged that the Empire had not understood what it was dealing with, and that the outcome had not been what the Empire intended. She sent it. The reply came back in 19 hours. It was longer this time. Shrell read through it with both her chief linguist and the xenobiologist standing over her shoulder, all three of them annotating the rough translation in real time. The people of the third planet, they called themselves humans, and their world Earth and their star Sol, had a number of things to say. They had known about the Empire for approximately 7 months, ever since the first contact with their patrol vessel. They had spent that time studying the intercepted communications and what little they could observe from a distance. They had a picture of the Empire that was incomplete but not uninformed. They were not intimidated. That came through clearly enough even in the rough translation. Not aggressive, not threatening, but very specifically not cowed. They asked about the Empire's governance structure. They explained their own, briefly, a complicated arrangement of nation-states under a coordinating body, which Shrell's political analysts immediately flagged as unusual and potentially unstable, though they admitted they were working with limited information. They asked about the extent of the Empire's territory. They asked about the Empire's military doctrine. They asked, and this was the line that Shrell read 3 times, whether the Empire had a formal process for recognizing and negotiating with civilizations that were not currently within its membership, not asking to join, not asking for protection, asking whether there was a process for being recognized as an equal party outside the Empire's structure. Shrell set the document down. They know exactly what they want, her chief linguist said. Yes, Shrell agreed. They want to negotiate from a position of, he hesitated, choosing the word carefully, parity. Yes, he looked at the scan data, the orbital structures, the traffic patterns, the very large ship. Do they have the capability to back that position up? Shrell thought about the undying reach, about 11 seconds, about what a debris field looked like on a drone feed. I think, she said, we should proceed as if they do. In the Geneva building with no name on the door, Petty Officer Reeves was 3 hours into her next shift when the latest translation came in from the human diplomatic team. She read through it with the same careful attention she'd been applying to every message in the exchange over the last 2 weeks. The Kelthari, that was what the aliens called themselves, had responded to the parity question with something that read like careful diplomatic hedging. They did not say yes. They did not say no. They talked about the complexity of imperial law and the structure of the recognition process and the role of the Senate in making such determinations, which, in Reeves's experience, and she had spent 4 years translating diplomatic communications before being assigned to this office, meant, we are going to check with our bosses and get back to you. What interested her more was what the Kelthari had not asked about. They had not asked about human military capability. Not directly. They had asked about governance and structure and process, but not about ships, not about weapons, not about numbers. They were being very careful not to ask a question that might reveal how much they already knew, and how frightened it had made them. Reeves filed her annotation and went to get coffee. She passed the wall in the break room where someone had, as a joke, pinned a printed transcript of the first transmission from the Kelthari vessel, alongside a printed copy of the last known status report of the Persistent before it came home. The Persistent was back. Everyone in the building knew that. The crew had been debriefed. Commander Voss had given a 12-hour testimony about the engagement in the Kareth system. The official report was classified at a level that meant Reeves had not read it, but the unofficial word, the version that traveled through the building the way all unofficial words traveled, was that Voss had engaged a battle, group of 7 ships, destroyed all of them, taken significant damage, and brought his crew home, all of them, not a single human casualty. Reeves looked at the transcript, at the line from the Kelthari message. "We mean no harm, we ask only to speak." Bit late for that, she said to nobody in particular, poured her coffee, and went back to work. The careful word was 4 weeks into its stay at the edge of the Sol system, when Grand Senator Vorath's encrypted message arrived. Shrell read it in her private cabin with the door sealed. The Senate had reviewed her reports. The Senate had reviewed the scan data. The Senate had reviewed the analysis from the specialists, and the translations from the linguists, and the opinion papers from the behavioral scientists. The Senate was divided. Half of them wanted to treat the humans as a potential threat and position military assets at the edge of the system as a deterrent, not an attack, a presence, a demonstration that the Empire took the situation seriously. Half of them thought that was exactly how you started a war with a civilization that had already demonstrated it could destroy a battle group with a single vessel. Vorath was trying to hold the two halves together long enough to reach a decision. His message to Shrell contained one instruction: find out what they want and whether we can give it to them without losing face. The Senate needs something it can vote on. Shrell read the message twice, then deleted it. She went back to the bridge. Outside the viewport, the Sol system glittered. Somewhere in there, among the traffic and the orbital structures and the quiet industrial hum of a civilization going about its business, was a ship called the Persistent. It was currently docked at a station the humans called Waypoint 3, being repaired. Shrell had that information because the humans had offered to tell her its status, unprompted, during the last exchange, as if they wanted her to know where it was, as if they were being very deliberate about transparency, as if they knew that a diplomat who had to report back to a frightened Senate would find it useful to be able to say, "We know exactly where the ship is, it is docked, it is being repaired, it is not pointed at anyone." Shrell had been in diplomacy for 30 years. She had never met a civilization that understood the mechanics of it so quickly. "Open a channel," she said. "It's time to ask to meet in person." The meeting was held on a station, not on Earth, because the humans had decided, after 48 hours of argument between their coordinating body and their individual nation-states and their military commands and their diplomatic offices, that inviting an alien delegation to the surface of their homeworld, before knowing the full shape of their intentions, was a risk they were not going to take. Not on the careful word, because the humans had decided, separately in a different argument, that walking onto a Kelthari ship before any trust had been built was also a risk they were not going to take. The station was called Waypoint 7. It sat at the L4 point of Earth's orbit, a steady structure of gray metal and docking rings and practical corridors built for function rather than appearance. It was a working station, fuel storage, maintenance facilities, a modest habitation ring for long-haul crews waiting on cargo runs. It smelled, in the habitation ring, of recycled air and machine oil, and something the humans called coffee, which the careful word xenobiologist later noted in her report as a stimulant compound consumed in large quantities at all hours, the cultural significance of which appears to exceed its physiological effects. Ambassador Shrell arrived with 4 people. Her chief linguist, a Tassani named Vel, who had spent the last 3 weeks doing nothing but study the human language with an obsessiveness that had concerned the medical officer. Her behavioral analyst, a Draith named Coral, who watched everything and said almost nothing and wrote very long reports afterward. Her first officer, Lieutenant Commander Holt, who was there, because Shrall did not like walking into unknown rooms without someone she trusted at her back, and a junior diplomat named Pell, who was there because someone had to take notes. The humans arrived with 5 people. Shrall had expected diplomats. She had expected the kind of people who ran coordinating bodies, polished, careful, trained in the architecture of negotiation. 3 of the 5 were diplomats. She could tell by the way they held themselves. The lead human diplomat was a woman named Director Amara Osi, small and composed, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of stillness that people develop over decades of sitting across tables from difficult problems. She introduced herself and her two colleagues with the precise, unhurried courtesy of someone who had done this many times in many rooms. The fourth person was a scientist, young, wide-eyed, barely containing the expression of someone who was living the single greatest moment of their professional life. He introduced himself as Dr. Yusuf Brandt, Xenolinguistics, and then immediately apologized for how excited he looked, which made Vel laugh, a sound that surprised everyone in the room, including Vel, that broke something. Some surface tension that had been sitting over the room since both groups walked in. The fifth person was not a diplomat or a scientist. He was a soldier. He was not wearing a uniform. Shral had been specifically told that the human military would send a representative in civilian, dressed to avoid the meeting reading as a military encounter. But she would have known what he was regardless. The way he moved when he entered the room, the way he assessed it, exits, positions, angles, in the single second before his expression settled, the scar along his left jaw. Director Osi introduced him as Commander Elias Voss, currently on administrative leave, attending in an advisory capacity. Shral looked at him for exactly as long as was polite and then looked away. Voss did the same. They both understood, without saying so, exactly what his presence meant. The humans were not hiding what had happened. They were not pretending the persistent and the Kareth system were separate from this conversation. Voss was in the room the same way the unasked questions were in the room, acknowledged by presence, not by words. A reminder that the humans knew, and the humans wanted the Kelthari to know they knew, and nobody needed to say any of that out loud. Shral found herself respecting it. They sat down. The table was human design, flat, rectangular, practical, 6 chairs on each side. Someone had placed water vessels in the center, along with small containers of a solid food substance that Dr. Brandt later explained was called biscuits, and were, in his words, culturally mandatory at this kind of meeting. I'm not entirely sure why, but please eat one, it will help. Coral ate one. His report later noted that it was dense, slightly salted, and communicated nothing threatening. Shral began. She had prepared an opening statement. She had written it and revised it 7 times on the careful word with input from her entire team. It covered the Empire's history, its structure, its membership and how it worked, its protocols for first contact and integration of new civilizations into its system. She gave it. Director Osi listened without interrupting. Her 2 colleagues took notes. Dr. Brandt occasionally leaned toward Vel and murmured something about a specific word choice, and Vel would nod or shake their head, a quiet linguistic consultation running alongside the main proceedings. Voss sat with his hands folded on the table and looked at Shral while she spoke, not hostile, not warm, just watching, the way someone watches a road they are about to drive on. When she finished, Director Osi said, "Thank you. That was very clear." She paused for exactly the right amount of time. "I'd like to ask a few questions if I may." "Of course," Shral said. "The Empire's membership structure, the process by which a civilization joins, how voluntary is it?" Shral had expected this question. She had prepared a careful answer about the consultation process and the negotiation framework and the rights of member states. She gave that answer. Osi listened to it and then said, "And if a civilization declines membership, the Empire respects the sovereignty of civilizations that choose not to join. Have any declined?" A pause, small, probably imperceptible to anyone who was not watching for it. Coral noted it in his report anyway. "There have been cases," Shral said, "where civilizations at early stages of development have been given time to develop before the question of membership is formally raised." "That isn't quite what I asked." Shral looked at her. Osi looked back, both of them completely still. "No," Shral said. "In the history of the Empire, no civilization that has been formally approached has declined." Osi nodded slowly. "I see." She made a small note. "A second question. The ships you sent to intercept the persistent, were they sent to escort or to destroy?" This question Shral had also prepared for. The answer she had prepared was about protocol escalation and the Empire's standard procedures for unregistered vessels. She looked at Voss. He was looking at her. She gave the prepared answer. Osi listened to it and nodded again, in the same way she had nodded the first time. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. The careful nod of someone filing information in a column marked things I will return to later. "Third question," Osi said, "and I want to be direct about why I'm asking this one. Because I think directness serves us better here than diplomatic language." She folded her hands. "The Empire has 700 billion citizens spread across 300 worlds. Earth alone has 8 billion people. We are, by any reasonable measurement, a very small civilization compared to yours. We understand that. We are not confused about the scale difference." She paused. But you sent a diplomatic mission rather than another military response. And you asked for a meeting. And you've been very careful, in everything you've communicated, to present this as an equal conversation. She held Shral's gaze. So my question is, what do you actually want from us? The room was quiet. Corel was very still. Pell had stopped writing. Shral said, understanding. Of what? Of you. She let it sit for a moment. The Empire has existed for 400 years. In that time, we have encountered and incorporated hundreds of civilizations. We have a very complete picture of how civilizations develop, how they grow, what they want, what they fear. We have models and frameworks and historical precedent for almost every situation we have encountered. She paused. You do not fit any of our models. Dr. Brandt made a small sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. Ozzy's expression did not change. Voss's expression did not change. In what way? Ozzy asked. Your rate of technological development is unlike anything in our records. 230 years ago, our scouts noted that your civilization had not achieved spaceflight. You have now. Shral spread her hands slightly, a Kelthari gesture of acknowledged complexity. The vessel the Persistent engaged at Kareth. Our engineers have reviewed the sensor data extensively. We cannot replicate several of the weapon systems your ship used. We do not understand the propulsion behavior we observed. We do not know how a ship of that mass moves the way it did. Voss shifted slightly in his chair. It was the first movement he had made in 20 minutes. Osi said, You're telling us that our technology surprised you. Yes. And the Senate found that frightening. Yes. Osi looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, in a tone that was not unkind but was very precise, Ambassador, I want to tell you something. And I want you to understand that I'm telling you this not as a threat but as information. Because I believe you're an honest person trying to do a difficult job. Go ahead, Shral said. Earth is not the only human world. The room did not change. The air still circulated. The water vessel still sat in the center of the table. Pell still had a pen in hand. But something shifted. Shral felt it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. We have 17 established colonies, Osi continued. 4 of them are within what your charts designate as your outer territory. We've been there for between 30 and 60 years. We didn't ask permission because we didn't know you existed. We know now, she paused. I'm telling you because we'd rather you find out from us than find one of our settlements and make another assumption. Shral was very glad she had 30 years of diplomatic training. She kept her expression exactly where it was. 4 colonies, in imperial space. For up to 60 years, undetected. She was going to have to put that in a report and send it to Vorath, and she was not looking forward to that conversation. I appreciate you telling me, she said. We also have something else, Osi said, that I think you should know. She opened the document on the table surface. The table had a display layer built in, something Shral's team had noted but not fully cataloged, and pulled up what appeared to be a chart, a spatial chart. Trajectories, distances, coordinates. These are the 8 vessels we currently have in deep space, Osi said. Their positions as of 48 hours ago, their headings, their intended missions. Shral looked at the chart. One of the positions was deep in the outer rim, moving away from Sol, an exploration mission, the annotation said. One was in the asteroid belt of a system Shral recognized as belonging to one of the Empire's quieter member states. A mining survey, the annotation said. One was on the far side of the galaxy from the Empire entirely, a long-range probe, pushing the edge of what human FTL drives could reach. Shral looked at the chart for a long time. You're showing us this voluntarily, she said. Yes, why? Osi said. Because trust is built in specific ways. One of those ways is demonstrating that you're not hiding things you could hide. She met Shral's eyes. We're showing you where our ships are. We're telling you about our colonies before you find them. We're telling you about our capabilities before you feel compelled to test them again. Her voice stayed even. We would prefer not to destroy any more of your ships, Ambassador. It creates paperwork on both sides. Holt made a sound. Shral was fairly certain it was a suppressed laugh. She did not look at him. I understand, Shral said. Voss spoke for the first time. He had a low voice, careful, not the voice of someone who spoke often in rooms like this. I have a question, he said. Osi glanced at him. A small nod. He looked at Shral, the battle group at Kareth, the crew. Did they have families? The question landed differently than any question that had come before it. Shral had been prepared for strategic questions, territorial questions, questions about leverage and recognition and process. She had not been prepared for that one. Yes, she said, most of them. Voss nodded. He looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, his expression was the same, but something in it was different in a way Shral could not precisely name. I'm sorry, he said, that I couldn't have done it differently. The room was very quiet. Director Osi was looking at Voss. Her expression for just a moment was not composed in the way it had been for the last 2 hours. Shral said, The decision to send them was not yours, no, Voss said. But I was the one who fired. Nobody answered that. There was nothing to answer it with. After a moment, Director Osi straightened slightly, and the room eased back into its professional shape. I think we've covered a great deal of ground today, she said. I'd like to propose an adjournment and a second session. There are things we would like to propose formally, regarding recognition, territory, the colonies, a non-aggression framework, but those deserve proper time. Agreed, Schral said. They stood, both delegations. The small choreography of ending a meeting, gathering notes, capping pens, the careful neutrality of people who were not yet sure whether they were going to like each other. Schral paused on her way to the door. She turned back. Voss was still at the table. He had known her, she said. He looked up. The persistent, she said. Your ship. Our translators had difficulty with the name. They gave 3 possible translations. He waited. They settled on enduring, she said. But the one I found most accurate, given what I know of the engagement, was the third option. What was it? He asked. She held his gaze. The one that comes back, she said. She left. Voss sat at the table for a long moment after everyone else had gone. Then he stood up and went to find the coffee that Dr. Brandt had been talking about, because he had been awake for 26 hours and had 3 more days of diplomatic meetings to survive, and he had a feeling he was going to need it. On the careful word, 3 hours after the session ended, Schral sat in her cabin and wrote her report to Vorath. She wrote it carefully. She was always careful. But this one more than most. She wrote about the session, the questions, the answers, the voluntary disclosure of ship positions and colony locations, the chart, the 4 colonies in imperial space. She wrote, they are not what we expected. They are not what our models predicted. They are not frightened of us, and they are not trying to appear larger than they are. They know their size relative to ours, and they have decided it is not relevant. I am not certain yet whether this is confidence or something else. I am not certain yet what the difference would mean. She paused over the last section for a long time. Then she wrote, the commander of the vessel that destroyed the battle group at Kareth was present. He apologized for the deaths of the crew, not for the engagement, not for winning. For the deaths specifically, he described the limitation of the situation, that he could not have done it differently, without using it as justification. I found this difficult to categorize. I am still finding it difficult to categorize. She paused again. My recommendation, proceed with formal recognition negotiations. The alternative, treating this civilization as a threat to be managed rather than a party to be engaged, carries risks I believe the Senate has not fully modeled. They have 17 colonies. They have ships we cannot track in space we thought was ours. They know where their ships are. We do not know where ours are, by comparison, because we have never had reason to track them this or carefully. They are not trying to frighten us. That is either the most reassuring thing about them or the most frightening. I have not yet decided which. She sent the report. Outside the viewport, the Sol system turned at its own pace, indifferent and enormous, going about the long business of being a civilization that had not been in anyone's records until very recently and had not let that stop it for a single day. The debate lasted 11 days. Vorath had known it would be long. He had not expected it to be ugly. The emergency chamber under Centauri Prime was not designed for comfort. It was designed to function. The lighting was flat. The chairs were built for endurance, not ease. The screens were always on. 11 days in that room with the same 47 senators, the same recycled air, the same arguments cycling back around every 18 hours like a tide that did not know it was supposed to stop. Vorath had aged in that room. He could feel it. The debate had 2 positions. They had been the same 2 positions since day 1. The first position belonged to the bloc led by Senior Senator Drell of the Veth. Drell was old, older than Vorath. She had lived through the border conflicts of the last century. She had seen what happened when the Empire showed restraint in the face of a threat it did not fully understand, and what she had seen had left a mark on her that no amount of subsequent peace had fully covered over. She sat in her chair with the solidity of someone who had made up their mind before they walked in, and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Her position was this: the humans were a threat, not a future threat, a present one. They had destroyed a battle group. They had colonies in imperial space they had not disclosed until confronted. They had technology the Empire could not match. They had a homeworld with 8 billion people, and they were growing. Every day of delay was a day the Empire spent negotiating while the humans continued to expand. Her solution was a second fleet action, not 7 ships, not a battle group, a full fleet. Enough tonnage to make the outcome certain. Strike the colonies in imperial space first. That was justifiable under imperial law. Territory violation. Use the colonies as the legal pretext. Move quickly. Establish the outcome before any negotiation could be used as cover for the humans to prepare. We do not know the full extent of their capability. Drow said, for what Vorath counted as the 14th time across 11 days. We know what one ship did to 7. We do not know what 100 ships can do. We should not wait to find out. The second position belonged to Vorath and the block of senators who had read Shrall's reports carefully and understood what they contained. His position was this: a fleet action against the humans, based on what was currently known, was not a risk assessment. It was a gamble made in ignorance against an opponent whose full capability was unknown. In a situation where the Empire had already been wrong once at significant cost, the colonies were a problem, a real one, legally and territorially, but they were a negotiating problem, not a military one. The humans had disclosed them voluntarily. That disclosure was the single clearest signal available about their intentions. You did not voluntarily tell someone where your assets were if you were preparing to attack them. We have one data point, Vorath said, one ship, one engagement. We have drawn enormous conclusions from that data point. I am not willing to commit the lives of another fleet, and potentially the stability of the entire outer territory, to a decision made on one data point. Drow looked at him across the chamber. One data point that cost us 7 ships and 142 crew. Yes, Vorath said. Which is exactly why I am not willing to find out what 2 data points cost. They went around like that for 11 days. On the 12th day, Drow called for a formal vote. She had the numbers. Vorath had known for 3 days that she had the numbers, and he had spent those 3 days trying to peel away enough of her coalition to swing the count. He had gotten 2. He needed 4. He was still short. The vote came in at 26 to 21 in favor of a military response, not a full fleet. Drow had made a concession to the moderates, not the full strike she had wanted, but a containment action. 6 battle groups, 42 ships. They would move on the 4 human colonies in Imperial space simultaneously, occupy them, and use them as leverage in negotiations. The humans would be told that the colonies were held pending a satisfactory resolution of the recognition and territorial questions. If the humans complied, the colonies would be returned. If they did not, the vote left that sentence unfinished. Vorath read the motion. He read it twice. He looked at the 26 senators who had voted for it. You are making a decision, he said, based on what one human ship did to 7 of ours, and your plan is to send 42, Drow said. 42 is not 7. No, Vorath agreed. It is not. He set down the motions. I want it entered in the record that I oppose this action. I want it entered that I consider it strategically unsound and diplomatically catastrophic. I want it entered that when the outcome is known, the record will show that this chamber was warned. He sat down. The motion passed. Shrall received the Senate's order 14 hours later. She read it in her cabin with the door sealed, which was becoming her habit for documents she did not want to be seen reading in public. She read it once, then again. Then she sat for a long time looking at nothing in particular. The order was clear. She was to continue diplomatic contact with the human delegation. Specifically, she was to schedule another session as soon as possible and keep it going for as long as possible. While the session was ongoing, the 42 ships of the containment action would move on the colonies. By the time the humans knew the colonies had been seized, it would already be done. She was, in other words, being asked to be a distraction. Shrall had been in diplomacy for 30 years. She had never been asked to be a distraction before. She thought about Director Osi. The careful hands folded on the table. The voluntary chart of ship positions. We would prefer not to destroy any more of your ships, Ambassador. It creates paperwork on both sides. She thought about Voss. I'm sorry. That I couldn't have done it differently. She looked at the order for a long time. Then she picked up her secure communication unit and sent a message to Vorath. The message said, I will follow the Senate's order. I want it noted, for the record, that I believe this will not end the way the Senate expects it to end. I also want it noted that I believe the humans will know before the ships arrive. I do not know how. I believe they will know. She sent it and went to schedule the second session. Petty Officer Reeves was on shift when the anomaly appeared. It was not a signal. It was not a transmission. It was a pattern. She had been watching the deep space sensor feeds for 3 months now. She knew what normal traffic looked like. She knew what standard Imperial movement patterns looked like, having spent 6 weeks studying everything they had been able to passively collect about Kelthari ship behavior during the careful words, stay at the edge of the system. The pattern was subtle, small changes in the background density of the sensor noise at 4 specific points in the outer territorial zone, the kind of changes that came from large objects moving through FTL, the residual gravitational and electromagnetic wake of ships in transit. 4 specific points. Reeves pulled up the colonial registry. She overlaid the positions. The 4 points of sensor anomaly were in direct alignment with the 4 human colonies in what the Kelthari charts designated as Imperial Outer Territory. She checked her work 3 times. Then she hit the alarm. The room filled up faster than it had the first time. 3 months of watching this situation had put everyone permanently on a shorter fuse. The deputy director arrived in 4 minutes. A general arrived in 7. Reeves showed them the pattern. How confident are you? The deputy director asked. The pattern is consistent with large-scale FTL transit, Reeves said. Multiple ships. At each of the 4 colony locations. She paused. The timing is consistent with ships that departed Kelthari space roughly 14 days ago. That's 3 days before the second diplomatic session was scheduled, the general said. Nobody said anything for a moment. They scheduled the session, the deputy director said, while the ships were already moving. Still nobody said anything. Then the general said, very quietly, get me a line to Geneva Command, and someone get Director Osi out of bed. Director Osi arrived at the Geneva building at 3 in the morning local time. She did not look like someone who had been asleep. She looked like someone who had been lying in bed waiting for a specific piece of bad news to arrive. And it had finally arrived, and now she could get up and deal with it. She reviewed Reeves' analysis. She asked 3 clarifying questions. She looked at the overlay of colonial positions and sensor anomalies for a long time. Then she asked for Commander Voss. Voss arrived 20 minutes later. He was in civilian clothes, the same kind of clothes he had worn at Waypoint 7. He looked at the data and said nothing for a long time. How many ships? He asked. We can't get a precise count from passive sensors, Reeves said. Minimum estimate is 30, could be significantly more. Voss looked at the general. The general looked at Voss. An entire conversation happened in that look. The kind of conversation that only happens between people who have spent enough time in the same profession to not need words for the foundational questions. The colonies aren't military targets, Voss said. No, the general agreed. Civilians. Yes. How long before they arrive? The general looked at Reeves. Reeves said, based on the trajectory and standard Kelthari FTL speeds, which we have some data on from observing the careful word, approximately 46 hours. Voss stood very still. 46 hours, 4 colonies. Civilians who had gone out to the edge of known space to build something, who had not known the empire existed when they left, who were now sitting in the path of a containment action from a civilization they had no defenses against. What assets do we have in range? Voss asked. The general pulled up the deployment map. There were 3 human vessels within theoretical range if they pushed their drives hard. 2 were cargo ships that had been armed for piracy protection. Not warships, not anything close. 1 was a military patrol vessel. 1 military patrol vessel, against a minimum of 30 Kelthari ships. Voss looked at the map. He thought about Kareth. About what it felt like to bring a ship through something it was not supposed to survive. About Quan running the numbers in the dark. About the crew counting on him to find the line between what was possible and what wasn't, and walking it. He said, what's the patrol vessel? The general said, the Steadfast Vance class, crew of 91, who's the commander? Lieutenant Commander Park. She did 2 tours in the Outer Rim before this posting. Voss nodded, and Ambassador Schral is scheduling a second session for 2 days from now, Director Osi said. She had been quiet for several minutes watching. Now she spoke with the precision of someone who had been assembling pieces into a picture, while the fleet moves on the colonies. Yes, Voss said, which means she knows, Osi said. Or she's been ordered not to know. Either way, she's being used. Voss said nothing. Osi looked at him. I'm going to contact her. The room reacted to that. 3 people started talking at once. The general's expression moved through 4 different positions in 2 seconds. The deputy director said, Director, that would be a message, Osi said, cutting through it cleanly. Not a threat, not a demand, a message, telling her what we know, giving her a chance. She looked at the general. We want to know if she's complicit in this or if she's a tool. Her response will tell us. The general said, and if she's complicit? Then we'll know that too, Osi said, and we'll act accordingly. She looked at Voss. While I send the message, I want you to talk to Park. Voss said, about what? Osi said. About whether 1 ship can do what 46 hours will require it to do. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll talk to her. He left the room. Reeves watched him go and then looked back at the sensor overlay. 4 points of convergent movement, 4 colonies, 46 hours. She thought about the line in the first translated message, the one pinned on the break room wall. We mean no harm. We ask only to speak. She thought about what it meant that those words in the sensor data existed in the same universe, sent by the same civilization, separated by a few weeks in a Senate vote. She filed her updated analysis, poured her 4th coffee of the night, and kept watching. On the careful word, Schral's secure unit chimed at 0400 ship time. She was awake. She had not been sleeping. She read the message from Director Osi. It was short. Shorter than she had expected. It said, we know about the fleet. We know about the colonies. We know about the session schedule. We are not going to pretend we don't. We are also not going to attack your diplomatic vessel or harm your crew. We want to ask you one question. Is this your choice, or were you given an order? Shral sat in the dark of her cabin and looked at the message for a long time. The order from the Senate was clear. Keep the session going. Be the distraction. Do not tell them anything. She thought about the chart Osi had shown her. The voluntary positions of 8 human ships. Trust is built in specific ways. She picked up the secure unit and typed a reply. It took her 4 minutes to write 2 sentences. She sent it and sat back and thought about what it meant to serve an institution for 30 years. And then, in a single moment, serve it differently than it had asked. The message she sent said, "It is an order. I did not know when I scheduled the session. I know now." She paused, then added a third sentence. "Do what you need to do. I will do what I can from here." She set down the unit and looked at the viewport. Somewhere out there, 42 ships were moving toward 4 colonies. Somewhere out there, a patrol vessel called the Steadfast was being asked to do something that the numbers said was not possible. She had spent 30 years believing that diplomacy was the thing that made the impossible unnecessary. She was about to find out if that was still true. The Steadfast was not the persistent. Lieutenant Commander Ji Yan Park knew that the moment Voss told her what was coming. She had read the engagement report from Kareth. Everyone in the service had read it, in the way you read something you are not officially supposed to have access to, but which travels through a fleet so fast that official access becomes irrelevant. She knew what the persistent had done. She knew what it had cost. She knew her ship was not that ship. The Steadfast was a Vance-class patrol vessel, good bones, reliable. It had been in service for 11 years and had the kind of wear that came from 11 years of hard outer rim work. Scratches on the hull plating that had been repainted twice, a drive core that needed 3 extra minutes on startup, a weapons targeting system that the crew had nicknamed the Optimus because it consistently overestimated hit probability by about 8%. 91 crew. They had been on a routine patrol run when the orders came in. Park received them, read them, and then called her senior staff into the cramped briefing room adjacent to the bridge and told them what was happening. She watched their faces. Her weapons officer was a big man named Chief Petty Officer Adazi. He had a habit of being very still when information was serious. He was very still now. Her navigator, Ensign Torres, was young enough that his face had not yet learned to hide things. He looked at the numbers, 42 ships, 4 colonies, the timeline, and then he looked at Park, and then he looked at the numbers again, as if the second look might change them. Her engineer, Lieutenant Ford, was already doing the math in her head. Park could see it in the small movements of her eyes. Drive output, arrival time. What pushed meant for the drive core that needed 3 extra minutes on startup. She would push it anyway. "I'm not going to tell you this is a reasonable ask," Park said. "It isn't. We are one patrol vessel. We are being asked to intervene in a fleet action." She looked around the room. "I'm also not going to tell you that the people in those colonies have anybody else." Nobody said anything. "We can't fight 42 ships," Park said. "That's not what we're going to do. We're going to get between them and the colonies before the fleet arrives. And we are going to be visible, and we are going to make the choice of whether to fire on a human vessel, their decision rather than ours." She paused. "While we do that, the diplomatic channel will be active. Ambassador Shral has told our delegation that she is going to work from her end. Director Osi is going to work from ours." "What does working from her end mean?" Adaze asked. "I don't know exactly," Park said. Adaze absorbed this. "And if the fleet fires anyway?" Torres asked. Park looked at him steadily. "Then we will defend the colonies for as long as we can, and we will make sure that every second of it is on the record." The room was quiet. "Questions?" Park asked. Nobody had questions. "Good," Park said. "Ford, get me everything the drive core has. I want to be there 8 hours before they arrive." Ford was already standing. On the careful word, Shral was having the most difficult conversation of her career. She had requested an emergency communication link to Centaura Prime, not to the General Diplomatic Office, directly to Vorath. It took 4 hours to connect, because 4 hours was the minimum processing time for a secure channel request through the Senate's communication system, a bureaucratic reality that Shral had always accepted philosophically and was now finding deeply frustrating. Vorath's face appeared on the screen. He looked like a man who had not slept since before the vote. He probably had not. "You know," he said, "it was not a question." "Yes," Shral said. "They told me." Vorath closed his eyes briefly. "How?" "Passive sensor observation. They detected the fleet movement 46 hours out." She paused. "Vorath, they are not going to accept this. They are not going to stand aside while 42 ships occupy their colonies. They're going to respond." "With what?" Vorath said. "One patrol vessel, based on the sensor readings our people have managed." "The patrol vessel doesn't matter," Shral said. "The patrol vessel is there to make a statement, not to fight. The statement is, you will have to fire on a human ship to reach those colonies. And if you fire on a human ship, you will have escalated this beyond any point where negotiation is possible. She leaned forward. And behind the patrol vessel, they have more ships. We don't know how many. We don't know where they are. We know about the ones they showed us. We do not know about the ones they didn't. Vorath said nothing for a moment. The Senate voted. I know what the Senate voted. I was there when you sent me the order. She made herself steady. Vorath, I have been doing this for 30 years. I have never broken a direct Senate order. I am not breaking one now. I am telling you, through the proper channel, through you, that this action will not achieve the outcome the Senate expects. It will not contain them. It will not give us leverage. It will start a war. She paused. And I do not think we can win that war. Silence, you don't know that, Vorath said. I know what one ship did to 7, Shral said. I know they have 17 colonies and we didn't find any of them until they told us. I know they have a patrol vessel that is right now pushing its drives to get between your fleet and those colonies. Not because it can win, but because the crew decided to go anyway. She stopped. What kind of civilization produces people who make that choice? And do we want to find out what they do next if we fire on those people? Vorath sat back. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had known this was coming since the vote and had been dreading the moment when knowing it became unavoidable. What do you want me to do, he said. I want you to stop the fleet, Shral said. The Senate voted based on incomplete information. They voted without knowing that the humans would detect the fleet in transit. They voted without knowing about the patrol vessel. They voted without knowing what it would look like in the record. In every record, Kelthari and human, when the story becomes. The Empire sent 42 ships to seize civilian colonies while its diplomats sat in a meeting room being used as a distraction. She held his gaze. That story will follow the Empire for generations, even if we win every military engagement. That is the story. Vorath looked at her for a long time. You're asking me to go back into that chamber, he said. Yes. After I already lost the vote. Yes. With new information that will make Dral look. Vorath, her voice cut through it quietly. The ships have 40 hours left. What do you want the record to say? He sat with that for a moment that stretched. Then he said, send me everything you have. The Steadfast arrived at Colony Brennan, the largest of the 4. A settlement of 12,000 people on a cold moon orbiting a gas giant, with 9 hours to spare. Park brought the ship to a full stop between the colony and the direction of the incoming fleet. She put every running light on. She made the Steadfast as visible as a ship its size could possibly be, a deliberate reversal of every tactical instinct she had, because the point was not to hide. The point was to be seen. She opened a broadcast channel on every frequency she had, including the ones the careful Word had used for communication, and she sent a message. It said, This is Lieutenant Commander Ji-Yon Park of the human vessel Steadfast. We are in orbit of Colony Brennan. We are aware of your approach. We are not here to engage you. We are here to ask you a question before anything else happens. She paused before sending the last line. Then she sent it anyway. The people in those colonies went out there to build something. Most of them were born after the Empire's scout flagged our world. They don't know you. You don't know them. Nobody made a choice to be enemies yet. That choice is still ahead of us. I am asking you to think about whether you want to be the person who makes it. She cut the broadcast. A Daisy looked at her from across the bridge. You think they'll hear that? Torres asked. Fleet commanders monitor all active channels, Park said. They'll hear it, and if they don't care. Park looked out the viewport at the small bright point of Colony Brennan's lights. Then they'll have to fly through us to get there. Aboard the Imperial Fleet flagship Iron Covenant, Fleet Admiral Soros read the broadcast twice. She had been given her orders from the Senate. She had 42 ships behind her. She had legal authority under Imperial territorial law for the containment action. She had a clear mission, a clear timeline, and a clear objective. She had also been at Centauri Prime, when the footage from the Kareth system was shown in the emergency chamber. She had watched the undying Reset come apart. She had known 130 of those 142 crew by name. The patrol vessel was one ship. The Steadfast was, by her assessment, no threat to the fleet. But the broadcast was on the record now. And the choice was, as the human commander had said, still ahead of them. Her communications officer said, Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Centauri Prime. Soros looked up. Senate Priority Channel, the officer said. It's from Grand Senator Vorath. She read it. She read it twice. Then she stood very still for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, running through the calculus of a career spent following orders and the specific weight of an order that told you to stop. All fleet, she said. Reduce to station-keeping velocity. Hold bridge went quiet. But Admiral, her tactical officer said, the mission order has been superseded by a Senate priority directive, Soros said. Hold position. Open a channel to the human vessel. She paused. And someone get me the careful word. The message from Soros reached Park 4 minutes later. It said, "We are holding position. We are awaiting updated instructions from the Senate. No action against the colonies will be taken at this time." Park read it. She sat very still. Then she said quietly to no one in particular, "Okay." Torres made a sound. It started as a breath and ended as something that was not quite a laugh and not quite the other thing. Daisy said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You want me to notify the colonies?" "Yes," Park said. "Tell them to stay inside for now. Tell them it's fine. Tell them not to open a drink yet because nothing is concluded." She paused. "But yes, tell them." She leaned back in her chair and looked at the viewport. 42 ships, holding position. One patrol vessel between them and 12,000 people. And somewhere in a room on a station that smelled of machine oil and coffee, a conversation that was just now becoming possible. The second session at Waypoint 7 happened 4 days later. Same table, same chairs, same biscuits, different air in the room. Both delegations arrived without the careful neutrality of the first meeting. Things had happened. Both sides knew what the other side had done, and what the other side had chosen not to do. And that knowledge sat in the room as a presence alongside the people. Shral arrived and Director Osi was already there. Osi stood when Shral walked in, a gesture that was, in human culture, courtesy. In context, it was something more. Shral sat across from her. Voss was there again. Park was there this time too, a last-minute addition that Osi had asked for, and the human coordinating body had approved. She sat next to Voss, her hands folded, her expression the kind of calm that had been earned rather than practiced. Shral looked at them and then at Osi. "I want to say something," Shral said, "before we begin." "Go ahead," Osi said. The action the Senate authorized was not representative of a consensus within the Empire. There are those, significant voices, who did not vote for it and worked to stop it. She paused. "I want that to be part of the record." "It is," Osi said. "We know." Shral nodded. "And I want to say, personally, not on behalf of the Empire, that the message your commander sent to our fleet was the most important thing said in this situation since it began." Park looked slightly surprised. "It wasn't complicated. The most important things rarely are," Shral said. The room settled. Director Osi opened the document on the table display. "We have a proposal. It's a framework, not a final agreement. It covers 4 things: recognition of human civilization as a non-member sovereign entity, resolution of the colonial question in the outer territory, a communication protocol for situations where our ships are in proximity, and a process for further negotiation." She looked at Shral. "It doesn't ask you to give us anything you can't give. It doesn't ask us to become part of the Empire. It asks both sides to agree that the other exists, with rights, and to stop shooting at each other." Shral read the framework. It took her 15 minutes. Then she looked up and said, "The language on colonial sovereignty in the outer territory is going to be difficult for the Senate." "We know," Osi said. "We wrote an alternative formulation for that section. Page 9. Shral turned to page 9. "Better," she said. "We thought so." Shral looked at the document for another moment. "I cannot sign this today. The Senate has to vote. That will take time and it will not be a clean vote." "We know," Osi said. "We're not asking for your signature today. We're asking you to take it back." "I will take it back," Shral said, "and I will argue for it. That's all we're asking." A moment. Then Shral said, "I have a question, not a diplomatic one." "Ask it," Osi said. Shral looked at Park. "Your message to our fleet. You said the choice was still ahead of us, that nobody had chosen to be enemies yet." She paused. "Did you believe that when you sent it?" Park thought about the question. Really thought about it in the visible way, looking slightly away, turning it over. "I believed," she said finally, "that the people in those colonies had done nothing wrong, and that whoever was on those ships had probably also done nothing wrong. They were following orders from people who had made a decision based on incomplete information and fear." She paused. "I believed that those 2 things were true at the same time, so yes, I believed it." Shral looked at her for a long moment. "I will put that in my report to the Senate," she said. The vote when it came was not clean. Vorath had told her it would not be. 29 to 18 in favor of opening formal recognition negotiations under the framework. 8 senators abstained. Dral voted against and did not speak during the session that followed the vote, which was, in Vorath's long experience with Dral, more concerning than if she had spoken, but it passed. The formal message from the Empire went to Director Osi's office on a Tuesday morning Geneva time. Reeves was on shift when it came in. She ran the translation, checked it twice. Then she walked down the hall to the deputy director's office and knocked on the door. He looked up. She held up the translation. He read it. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "Go get Osi." Reeves got Osi. Osi read the message standing in the doorway. She was in her coat, about to leave for a different meeting. and she stopped in the doorway and read it and then read it again. They want to begin formal talks, Reeves said, in case the translation had been unclear. I can read, O.C. said. Yes, ma'am. O.C. stood in the doorway with the message in her hand for a moment that was longer than the moment needed to be. Then she said, "Get me Ambassador Schral, and tell her." She paused. "Tell her I said thank you." Reeves went back to her desk. She put the message in the official record, flagged it with the highest priority designation, and sent the notification to every relevant office. Then she looked at the break room wall, at the printed transcript that was still there, faded slightly now from weeks of fluorescent light. "We mean no harm. We ask only to speak." She thought about all the things that had happened since that message arrived. The fleet, the Steadfast, the 42 ships holding position in the dark, while one patrol commander stood between them and 12,000 people, and asked a question, instead of firing a weapon. She thought about Commander Voss in the meeting room, his hands folded, the scar on his jaw saying, "I'm sorry, that I couldn't have done it differently." She thought about Schral sending 2 sentences in the middle of the night that broke her orders, and did it anyway. None of it was in any record the Empire had kept. None of it fit any model they had built. None of it had stopped happening just because their models didn't account for it. Reeves filed her last annotation of the shift, marked the record complete, and got her coat. It was a long walk from the building with no name on the door to the transit station, and the morning was cold and clear, and somewhere above the cloud cover that she could not see through, in the dark between stars that she could not reach, things were in motion that she had watched begin in a 12-hour shift 3 months ago. The record would grow. The record would become enormous and complicated and full of things that defied the models and broke the categories and refused to fit. But it existed now. They were in it. That was enough for today.